Welcome back to Andersen Acres. We're in the kitchen again tonight, and tonight we are going to make cookies. Specifically, we're going to make cranberry orange pinwheels. These are sweet and fruity and delicious. They're also a refrigerator or an icebox cookie, meaning once we form the actual log, we have to put it in the freezer. So there's going to be a lot of going in and out of the fridge and freezer with this particular recipe. So just be prepared for that. This is not a recipe that's done in 20 minutes. This will take you about 4 hours, accounting for time in the fridge and freezer. So let's get started. You need to make your filling before you do anything else. So we need a small saucepan, and we have not heated it up yet. It needs to start cold. You're going to want half a cup of cold water, 3/4 of a cup cranberry sauce. You can just get that out of there. There we go. You can just use the canned stuff. It's not a big deal. You can use, actual with all the fruit in it, cranberry sauce if you want, but you certainly do not have to. And I am myself today just using the canned stuff because that's what I've got. You're also going to want a 1/4 cup of orange marmalade. Okay, that's easy to get. It's usually at most of your grocery stores. If you can't get it at your grocery store for whatever reason, you can also get it online. You are also going to want 1 tablespoon of cornstarch. Just plop that in there. Give it kind of a little bit of a mix with your whisk. Okay, it won't look that appetizing right now. Now we're going to heat it up over medium heat. Once we kind of get most of that incorporated, it will melt as it goes. Ignore that light going on and off. That's the auto light over the sink. So it will go faster once we heat it up. Okay, it will melt. So we're going to just turn the heat on to medium. We're going to stir this pretty constantly. I'm not going to make, that's the wrong element again. I'm not going to make you watch me heat this up, but we are going to heat it to boiling. So I'm going to pause the recording, and when this is heated to boiling, I will resume recording and we'll continue. Okay, so our sauce is now boiling. Remember, this is the filling for our cookies. So it has come to a boil. Remember, only medium heat. Do not go to high heat. It'll burn. Trust me, it'll burn. So you want to keep boiling this now for 5 minutes. We're going to set a timer. 5 minutes. And you want to stir it, I'm not going to say continuously, but a lot. Okay, you can let it sit for probably 20 seconds at a time. But remember, this is fruit. This is cranberry and orange and stuff. It will boil and it will burn. So you want to make sure that you're stirring it frequently. It doesn't have to be every single second. So we're going to boil this for 5 minutes. Then we're going to come back and I'll show you what to do next. Be back in a minute. All right, so we are about 10 seconds away from my 5-minute timer. Let it go the whole 5 minutes. And I have been stirring consistently, so yeah, it maybe sat for 20 to 30 seconds without a stir here and there. There it goes. That's 5 minutes. You notice it is much thicker than when we started, and all the ingredients are melted and incorporated. That buzzer's a little annoying, but do set a timer. You want to make sure that you get that full 5 minutes. So all of your ingredients should be melted and incorporated. Turn off the heat, and then give it one final stir, and then pull it off the heat. Okay, take it off the heat completely. Stir it a few more times just because you don't want anything burning on the bottom. It is hot. So give it a stir. See if it's still bubbling. If it's still bubbling, give it another stir to help release some of that heat. There we go. It's not bubbling anymore now. It will not burn. You can get rid of your whisk at this point. You won't need it. So now what you're going to do, you see how hot that is? You can see the steam rising. But now what you're going to do is you're going to leave it. You need this to drop in temperature. It has to come to room temp. So right now it's obviously way too hot. So you let it just sit on your stove. Don't cover it. Don't touch it. You want to leave it until it is entirely room temp. Once it is room temperature, you can put the lid on. That's why my lid is here. So then I'll put the lid on, and then I'll put it in the fridge for 2 hours. Okay, that's why this recipe takes a little while to make, because the filling has to sit in the fridge for at least 2 hours after it is cooled down. So it's actually about 2.5 hours before we can start making our cookies, because this needs to cool. So let it cool, stick it in the fridge, and let it come to that nice cold temperature that your fridge is at naturally before you start making your cookies. If you try to work with it like this is not filling. This is still far too loose, still far too liquidy. It has to cool down and set before it can be used. So don't touch it. We're just going to leave it alone. Then we'll put it in the fridge once it's cooled down. Remember to cover it when it's in the fridge. Do not cover it when it's cooling. So after this has cooled and been in the fridge for 2 hours, we will come back and start making our cookie. All right, so our filling is now in the fridge. It has to stay there for 2 hours, remember. You let it cool completely, then stick it in the fridge for 2 hours with the lid on. In the meantime, let's make our dough. This is a really easy dough, no problem at all. All right, so what you're going to start with is, first of all, you want half a cup of butter. You can use margarine. It's not that big a deal in this recipe. The defining flavor is going to be the filling we made. So it's okay to use margarine if you'd like. I tend to use butter, but it doesn't really matter. You want 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar. You do want to tightly pack your brown sugar, remember? So I'm just going to break up my clumps of tightly packed brown sugar. It should clump. You should pack it tightly enough that it does clump. All right, inside your measuring cup. That's why it often looks like a piece of measuring cup when you dump your sugar in. So 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar. All right, we're going to cream that together. And like I usually do, I'm going to turn the volume down just so you don't have to hear the mixer. It's kind of annoying. Okay, I'm a little bit messy today with my batter. That's okay. No problem. Okay, to our butter and our sugar, we are going to add 1 egg. And we're going to cream that together as well. All right, we will not need our electric mixer anymore. Set it aside. Okay, to this, we are going to add 1 3/4 cups of white flour, 1 teaspoon baking powder, 1 teaspoon of orange zest. We do want to punch up that orange flavor that we got from the marmalade. 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Can be any salt. That's just table salt, but you can use a Himalayan or a sea salt or a kosher salt. It doesn't matter. We're also going to add 1/4 teaspoon of allspice. It really gives your dough a nice flavor. Now here's where we remove any jewelry. Throw my ring at the side. And we're just going to work this with our hands because, yeah, it's a little gooey at the beginning, but it's so much faster with this dough just to go with your hand. So we're just going to mix it with our hand, incorporate everything, get everything tossed around. I also like that you actually mix it better typically when you're using your hands as opposed to using a wooden spoon or your mixer, because you can feel the consistency of the dough. So if you feel any of those lumps of brown sugar or anything, you can just break them up with your fingers. If your lumps are too hard to break up with your fingers, then you needed to soften your brown sugar first with either a piece of apple or a piece of bread or whatever, or a brown sugar bear. I like my brown sugar bear. So there we go. It's coming together really nice. Now, you're not going to be able to work with this dough right away because you are going to have to refrigerate it. So you're going to want to cover it and refrigerate it, which is not a big deal because remember, our filling is already in the fridge. So you want to refrigerate it about an hour. And that works out really well with the filling because if you're working on this while you're waiting for the filling to chill, you just pop this in the fridge beside the filling. And by the time the filling is done chilling, so is your dough. So just keep going till you have a pretty stuck together dough. Okay, just give that a really good work. My son is dancing through the kitchen. He's helping. Dancing through the kitchen. That would be Rowan. He's helping.
I was tiptoeing so I wouldn't make sounds. Thank you very much.
That was more of a dance than a tiptoe, Rowan. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So you're just going to really work this dough till it sticks together. And it does incorporate pretty well. And if you're having trouble getting it to stick together because it's just too dry, you can add a tablespoon of milk. Be very careful with that though. You actually don't want this sticky because it has to roll really well. Okay? It has to roll out and stay together. If it's too wet, it's not going to do that. You can also, like this is a wee bit dry, so what I'm going to do is wet my hands. If you wet your hands just a little bit, the moisture from your hand gets into the cookie dough and just gives you a little bit more moisture to work with if you need to. Because this dough can be a little bit finicky, but it's easy. It's an easy dough, sometimes finicky. So there we go. That's much better. Remember, you don't want it like sticky, because if it's sticky, it's never going to roll. It'll just stick. There we go. So yeah, just about like that. And then kind of just clump it into a ball. Doesn't matter what the shape is. It can be a ball, log. Doesn't matter. You're going to roll it out later anyway. Okay, so just clump that together. Now, this is not going to roll out nicely right now. Okay, it's simply not going to. So it does have to be chilled. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a lid on here. And then we're going to stick this in the fridge for at least an hour. Now, my filling has about an hour and a half left to chill. So by the time that's done chilling, this dough will be cool enough to really roll out and work with. So in the meantime, I'm just going to get all this dough off my fingers. We will come back, after I stick this all on, we will come back just as soon as everything is nicely chilled. All right, so a couple of hours have passed. We have our cookie dough in here, so we're going to take that out. There we go. We can get rid of this bowl. We're not going to need it. Then we also want to get, right here is our filling. You want to give it a little mix because you'll probably have a skin on the top. Mix that back in. You don't need to remove the skin. Just mix it in. There you go. Set that aside. Okay, what you're going to want to do is start by pressing and then rolling. So you don't want to roll this big lump, but you have to roll this out into about an 8 by 16 rectangle. Okay, so start by pressing, and then when you get it a little bit flattened, take your rolling pin and just start rolling. Okay, and press it back together where you have to. Use a silicone mat like I've got here because this makes it really a lot easier. I'm just going to rotate mine, but kind of just push it back into a rough rectangle and then just keep going. Don't use any flour. So if it does stick, just wipe it off and push it back on. Don't use any flour. You don't want this any drier than it already is. Okay, you don't want to introduce a bunch of flour. So just roll it out. You want about 8 by 16. Okay, inches. Someone's going to ask when I don't say inches. They're going to be like, inches or centimeters? I know I'm Canadian, but most of my viewers are American, so I typically say inches. So yes, inches. There we go. Go slow, because if you go too fast, what happens is your rectangle will get all skewed. So we're just going to press a little more, pat that back down. So you're going about 8 by 16. Okay, so my 0 is here, my 16 is here, and my 8 is about here. So I've got enough width. I just don't have the length. So remember just to push it back into a square, a rectangle, sorry. Push it back into a rectangle. And then roll some more. go. Okay, so you want about 8 by 16. The idea is you want to end up with 32 cookies. So if you want fatter cookies, you could do a smaller rectangle. I don't recommend it. I actually do recommend 8 by 16. There we go. Okay, here we are. There we go. That's pretty darn close. So we'll just, remember your edges don't have to be perfect. It's okay if they're not. You can make your log neater after you've rolled it. Okay? So that's pretty close to good. Whoops-a-daisy. If that happens, just push it all back together. If it tears, it's not that big a deal. Okay. Here we go. There. That looks good enough. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay? So then if you want, you can kind of take your hands and kind of manipulate it a little bit more to try to get exactly the shape you're looking for. Okay. All right. So now we want to take our filling. You do not need to use all of it. Okay, you can, but you don't have to. So just use a fairly large spoon and just kind of smear it. Keep away from those edges. Okay. You can go towards these small edges, that's fine. But the two long edges, you want to stay about 1/2 inch away. So you can get fairly close to the short edges, long edges, give it space. Okay, because you want the ability to roll this up without too much squashing of the filling. So just give a nice even layer. You can do a thicker coating of your filling or you can do a thinner coating. It's entirely up to you. How much filling do you want? You can save the filling so you can freeze it to do another batch. That's fine too. There we go. Just about like that. A little more on this end. So you can freeze the remaining. What you do is just put this in a container, a freezer safe container, and just pop it in your freezer. When you want to use it again, put it in your fridge to thaw for about 24 hours, and then you can use that. Okay, so that's how much filling I'm going to use. Remember, don't go right to the edge because what will happen is it'll squish everywhere. So then to start rolling, this is why I like having the silicone mat. You can just start doing this. Now, don't squish it. Okay, and it's okay if it breaks on the first couple of rotations here. You don't squish, don't push down. Just use your mat to kind of roll it and peel your mat back. And then go again. See, just careful pushing. Don't squish. If you squish down, what's going to happen is you're going to squish all your filling out. So just roll it nicely. Okay, and then once it's pretty well started, see, your filling squishes. That's why we had to leave a gap. Okay. It's okay if you have a little bit of breakage. Now, we're not going to finish rolling it because what we're going to do is get a piece of wax paper. Not wax paper, plastic wrap. Wax paper is for something else. So we're not going to use wax paper, we're going to use plastic wrap. So get a nice big sheet of plastic wrap. Okay. I have this nice big piece of plastic wrap, and I am going to kind of put mine at an angle. There we go. And then what we want to do is flatten this. Plastic wrap's hard to touch sometimes, hard to pick up. Okay, so this is going to squish out a little bit, and that's okay. That's why we didn't want to push too much because all our filling would come out. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold the plastic wrap, and we're going to push that down so it seals a little bit to the silicone. And then we're going to turn this whole guy over. Boop. Lift him away. Haha. So then we want to tuck our edge. Just like that. Remember, it's okay if you have some cracking. That's why we have plastic wrap. And we're going to take our plastic wrap unstick it from itself. That's one thing I hate about plastic wrap, but it's good for this because it sticks. Okay, now we're going to rotate it back this way. See, our plastic wrap kind of kept that neat. And then we're going to, there we go, wrap it up in our plastic wrap. Okay, I'm not going to seal my edges just yet because I want to be able to kind of make this a circle. So kind of use your hands and kind of just rotate it. Don't worry about this. That's normal. That's fine. So you just want to kind of rub it back and forth, and kind of press your dough. You want it kind of even, a nice log. Don't worry about the filling. Okay? So you just kind of want to smooth it, warm it in your hands, roll it a little bit. Now you can do a little bit of squishing. Don't worry about that filling. This is okay. The filling's going to get everywhere anyway. We just wanted to contain it long enough to get it in the plastic wrap. Okay? So you can then push it back more if you want it a little bit thicker. Kind of push it back inside your plastic wrap. Or you can kind of give it a little more of a roll and make thinner cookies. So your cookies will be slightly smaller. So I am pushing mine inside, and then I'm going to pull my plastic wrap over one end. Okay, so you just tuck that in, pull your plastic wrap, and seal that up. And then you do the same to the other side. Again, either you're pushing it in and tucking, or what you're doing is rolling it out more so it's thinner. But again, I want about 16 inches. So once you have that, again, give it a push, give it a roll. There we go. Now we can really get. Now what we've got is our cookie log. So what we want to do is we want to stick this on a tray of some kind, a tray or a plate or whatever you have, it doesn't really matter, and then pop it in your freezer. You need it in your freezer for at least 4 hours, preferably overnight. So I'm going to put mine in the freezer for about 6 hours because it is now well into the evening and I'm going to go get some sleep, and I will come back in about 6-7 hours and we will actually bake some cookies. So we'll see you then. So our dough has been frozen for several hours. So now what we're going to do is take the plastic wrap off. Okay? Now plastic wrap's annoying, but it works really well in this situation. So we're going to take this off if we can find the edge. There we go. You don't have to be too gentle because remember it is frozen. So you want to work fairly quickly. You don't want it to thaw. You want them to go in the oven still frozen. So before you start doing this, preheat your oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. There we go. So preheat your oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Kind of line up your dough along your grid so that you can kind of see what you're doing. So mine is 16 inches, okay, which is what we were aiming for. So I'm going to cut them in 1/2-inch rounds. And you just work quickly, push down. Okay, so you want to work fairly quickly. You don't have to be too finicky about this, just chop. Okay, so you don't have to be perfect. Nobody has to be perfect. But if you cut about every 1/2 inch, you will end up with about 32 of these, okay? It's okay if you only have 30 or if you only have 28, that's fine too. Doesn't matter. But if you do every 1/2 inch, you will have 32 if your roll is actually 16 inches. So it's okay again if it's not. It's not really that big a deal. Okay, we're just gonna do that. So I actually have 31. So when you pull these out, they do have a nice little swirl, okay? So we're going to pop these. I don't need the knife anymore. We're going to pop these on the cookie tray. And we're just going to get as many as you can. Okay, just pop as many as you can on there. A little bit of space between them. You don't need too much. They're not going to spread that much. Okay? You will have to wash your cookie sheet liner after, so if you don't have a liner like I have, use wax paper. You can just use a greased, that's the oven preheated, but you can just use a greased cookie sheet, but then what happens is you're going to end up with your filling all over your thing. So use a liner or some parchment paper, not wax paper. I think I said wax paper a minute ago. Don't use wax paper, it lights on fire. So parchment paper or some kind of liner. This is a non-stick copper liner. So something like that, just so that your filling doesn't get all over your pan. It's easier to clean up. But you can just use your greased cookie sheet like you do most of the other times. That's fine too. Okay, so we're just going to get as many as we can on there. We're not going to get them all. It's not going to happen because it's a fair amount. 2, 3, 4. So now we're going to shove those in the oven and we're going to bake them for about 12 minutes at 375 degrees Fahrenheit. When we come back, I will show you what they look like cooked. All right, so our cookies did bake for 12 minutes. They are cooked. You can see there's a little bit of browning on the edges. Now you want to let them sit on the pan for 2 minutes after you take them out of the oven. I've already set my timer, so they've been sitting for 1 minute, so they're going to sit for another minute. So that's because if you take them off right now, the swirling, your cranberry swirl in there is all going to just kind of fall out. It needs a couple minutes to set and to finish cooking. So these come out really well as long as you wait. So you have to wait for your filling to chill, wait for your dough to chill, wait for your log to freeze, and then wait for these cookies to set before you pull them off the tray. So as soon as the next 30 seconds pass, we will start taking these off. And they are really easy to make. I know they look kind of complicated, but they're actually really easy. There's no step that you can't do without any trouble. All right, you can even use, if you really don't like cranberry, you could do something like a raspberry, use a raspberry jam and reduce that with a little bit of orange, or you could leave out the marmalade and do a little bit extra cranberry. You can change up the filling a little bit, and there it is. So we're going to take these guys off, and we're just going to transfer them to our cooling rack. Now, you want to use a cooling rack that provides plenty of airflow so that you can make sure that your cookies get cooled all the way around. You want them to cool completely. Then you want to store them in an airtight container, and they'll stay good for 4 or 5 days in an airtight container on your counter. You can freeze them, but if I were you and I was going to freeze them, I'd freeze the log and then just slice off the few that I needed because the log is already frozen. So you could very easily just freeze that log, leave it, and if you only want 6 cookies, just cut 6 off the end. So icebox cookies, the logs that you freeze, they're really easy to do at that step. So for that reason, I wouldn't bake these and then freeze them. There's really no point, because if you do that, you then have a frozen cookie when you could have a fresh cookie. So if you're going to freeze these, freeze them when they're, there we go, ow. But freeze them before you bake them, so before you slice them. So those are our cookies. Just take a look. Hey, look at how nice those look. Pretty swirls. Bottoms are browned. That's what you want. So I hope you've enjoyed making cranberry orange pinwheels with us here today, and I really hope you give this a shot at home. It's simple, easy, and definitely a crowd pleaser. We'll see you tomorrow.